A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, Herman, sitting here in Jerusalem today on March 18th, 2026, the silence outside is sometimes more telling than the noise. We have spent so many episodes talking about the shifting sands of the Middle East, but there is one shadow that looms larger than almost any other over our northern border. It is a group that people often call a terrorist organization, or a militia, or a proxy. But those labels feel increasingly outdated when you look at the sheer scale of what they have built. We are standing at a precipice where the old definitions of warfare are melting away, replaced by something much more professional, much more entrenched, and frankly, much more dangerous than a simple insurgent group.
You are exactly right, Corn. Herman Poppleberry here, and I have been diving into the research our housemate Daniel sent over this morning. Daniel was asking us to really peel back the layers on Hezbollah. He wanted to move past the headlines and look at the actual mechanics of how a localized group of insurgents transformed into what is effectively a non-state army with conventional military capabilities that rival many actual countries. It is a fascinating, if sobering, evolution. By early 2026, we are no longer looking at a group that just hides in the shadows. We are looking at a force that holds territory, manages a massive economy, and dictates the foreign policy of a sovereign nation.
It really is, and I think that is the perfect starting point. We often use these terms interchangeably, but there is a massive difference between a handful of guys with light weapons hiding in an alleyway and a force that can coordinate division-level maneuvers, manage complex logistics, and maintain an arsenal of over 150,000 missiles. Today, we are going to look at that transition. We are going to explore the origins, the elite Radwan unit, the strategic significance of the Litani River, and why the old maps of Lebanon do not really tell the story of who holds the power anymore. We need to understand that we are dealing with a hybrid actor, one that has the soul of a revolutionary movement, but the skeletal structure of a modern military.
And we should probably start by defining that shift in model. For decades, the world looked at Hezbollah through the lens of asymmetric warfare. That is the classic David versus Goliath setup, where the smaller force uses hit-and-run tactics because they cannot stand up to a conventional army in the open field. But what we are seeing now, and what has become undeniably clear by early 2026, is that they have moved toward a state-level conventional capability. They have heavy artillery, sophisticated anti-tank guided missiles like the Almaz 3, which allows for top attack strikes on armored vehicles, and a command structure that looks much more like a professional general staff than a guerrilla cell. They have moved from being a nuisance to being a strategic threat that can project power far beyond their immediate borders.
It is that state within a state concept we have touched on before, but it has morphed into something even more integrated. I mean, if you look at the history, it all starts in the chaos of 1982. You had the Lebanese civil war grinding on, the Israeli intervention, and a massive power vacuum in the south. That was the perfect petri dish for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, to export their communist ideology. It was not just about local grievances. It was about creating a forward operating base for the Iranian Revolution right on the Mediterranean. The initial group was a collection of different Shia factions, but the IRGC provided the glue and the funding to turn them into a cohesive force.
People forget that in the early 80s, Hezbollah was just one of many factions. But they had two things their rivals did not. First, they had an unwavering ideological core centered on the concept of velayat, faqih, or the guardianship of the Islamic jurist. This gave them a direct line of authority to Tehran. It meant that their strategic goals were aligned with a regional superpower from day one. Second, They had a level of financial and military backing that was unprecedented for a non-state actor. They did not just want to fight Israel, they wanted to provide social services, education, and security to the Shia population in Lebanon to cement their loyalty. They built a society, Korn, not just a militia. They created a welfare state that filled the gaps where the Lebanese government failed, making them indispensable to their base.
And that loyalty is the bedrock of their military strategy. It allows them to melt into the civilian infrastructure in a way that makes conventional targeting nearly impossible. But let us get into the hardware and the tactics. When people think of Hezbollah, they usually think of rockets. But the real game changer in recent years has been the Radwan unit. Herman, you have been looking at their training protocols. How do they actually differ from a standard infantry unit? Because I think people hear the word commando and think of a few guys in face paint, but this is something much more systemic.
The Radwan unit is named after Imad Mugnier, whose nom de guerre was Haj Radwan. These are not your average recruits. We are talking about several thousand highly vetted elite commandos. Their training is grueling and, frankly, mirrors what you would see in the Special Air Service or the Israel Defense Forces commandos. They specialize in small unit infiltration, night operations, and mountain warfare. But the most significant thing about them is their mission. They are not a defensive force. Their entire doctrine is built around the offensive. They are trained to operate in hostile territory, using advanced optics, thermal imaging, and silent movement to bypass traditional defenses.
Right, the Conquer the Galilee plan. That is the one that really changed the strategic calculus for the North. It is not just a propaganda slogan anymore, it is a documented military objective with specific units assigned to specific Israeli towns.
Precisely. For years, the assumption was that in a conflict, Hezbollah would just sit back and fire rockets. But the Radwan unit is trained to cross the blue line, seize Israeli communities, and hold territory. They have studied the terrain of northern Israel down to the meter. They use coordinated drone strikes to mask their movement. And they have integrated electronic warfare units that can jam local communications to create chaos during an incursion. When you combine that kind of tactical proficiency with their tunnel networks, you start to see why the term terrorist group feels so insufficient. This is a specialized maneuver force capable of high-intensity combat.
Let us talk about those tunnels for a second, because they are a huge part of this non-state army thesis. We are not talking about the simple dirt tunnels you might see in other conflict zones. These are hardened, multi-level command and control centers bored directly into the limestone of the Galilee Hills. I have seen reports of tunnels large enough to drive a truck through, equipped with full medical suites and weapon assembly lines.
Oh, the engineering is incredible in a terrifying way. Back in episode 1131, we talked about what I call the arsenal paradox. How do you hide thousands of missiles and tens of thousands of soldiers from the most advanced satellite and drone surveillance in the world? The answer is, you go deep. These tunnels are reinforced with concrete. They have ventilation systems, electricity, and fiber optic communication lines that are independent of the Lebanese national grid. They can move entire platoons from point A to point B without a single heat signature ever reaching a drone. This is what allows them to survive a massive air campaign. They have essentially built a second Lebanon underground.
And that brings us to the logistics of it all. To maintain that kind of infrastructure, you need a supply chain that is robust and resilient. We know that the primary artery runs from Iran through Iraq and Syria and into Lebanon. This is the famous land bridge. But the internal logistics within Lebanon are just as complex. They have turned ordinary villages into what are essentially decentralized ammunition dumps. They do not have one big warehouse that can be blown up. They have 5,000 small ones hidden in plain sight.
That is the core of the paradox, Korn. They use the polite fiction of the Lebanese state as a shield. They will store a long-range Fateh 110 missile in a specially modified room of a civilian house. They pay the family a stipend to live there, and suddenly, that civilian home is a military objective. It creates an impossible moral and tactical dilemma for any conventional army trying to neutralize the threat. They have effectively weaponized the entire geography of southern Lebanon. And it is not just missiles, it is fuel, food, and spare parts for their drone fleet. Everything is pre-positioned so that they can fight a prolonged war without needing a constant resupply from the outside.
It is a total fusion of the military and the civilian. And that leads us to the internal structure. You often hear analysts talk about the political wing versus the military wing, as if they are separate offices in a building. But from what we have seen, especially with the recent integration levels, that distinction seems more like a Western projection than a Lebanese reality. It is a way for European diplomats to keep talking to them while still technically condemning their actions.
I would go even further and say it is a deliberate deception. The political wing exists to provide the group with diplomatic cover and a seat at the table in Beirut. It allows them to veto any national policy that might threaten their military autonomy. But the decision-making power, the real weight of the organization, lies with the Shura Council, which is directly influenced by the Iranian leadership. In episode 757, we discussed the operational fusion between the IRGC and Hezbollah. It has reached a point where the command structures are almost indistinguishable during active operations. When a major decision is made, it is not being made by a politician in Beirut. It is being made by a military council that answers to the supreme leader in Tehran.
So you have an elite maneuver force in the Radwan unit, a massive hidden arsenal in the tunnels, and a political shield in Beirut. This brings us to the geography that defines the current standoff, the Litani River. Herman, for the people who are not staring at maps of the Levant all day, why is this specific river such a big deal? Why is it the line in the sand that everyone keeps talking about?
The Litani is the most important strategic landmark in Lebanon. It runs roughly parallel to the border with Israel, about 18 to 20 miles to the north at its closest point. In military terms, it is a natural tank ditch. It is a barrier that makes moving heavy armor and large-scale logistics much more difficult. But its real significance is political and legal. It defines the boundary of what is supposed to be a demilitarized zone.
You are talking about United Nations Resolution 1701. This was the agreement that ended the 2006 war, right?
After the 2006 war, the international community tried to create a buffer. Resolution 1701 mandated that the area between the Blue Line, which is the border, and the Litani River should be free of any armed personnel, assets, and weapons except for those of the Lebanese government and the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, or UNIFIL. The idea was to push Hezbollah's heavy weapons north of that river so that they could not easily launch a surprise ground invasion or use short-range direct-fire weapons against Israeli towns. It was supposed to be a guarantee of security for northern Israel.
But, as we have seen over the last 20 years, and especially leading up to today, in March 2026, that resolution has been effectively ignored. UNIFIL has the mandate, but they do not have the enforcement power, or frankly the will, to go into these villages and start kicking down doors to find missile silos. They are essentially observers in a war zone they are not allowed to police.
It is the ultimate example of a paper tiger. Hezbollah has spent the last 2 decades building up their presence south of the Litani right under the noses of the United Nations. They do it through front organizations like Green Without Borders, which claims to be an environmental group but actually builds observation posts and storage facilities right on the border. They have built an entire network of nature reserves, which is their code for camouflaged underground launch sites, all within the zone that is supposed to be weapon-free. So, when we talk about the Litani today, it is not just a river, it is a tripwire. If you see a major movement of forces back toward the river, or an attempt to actually enforce that demilitarized zone, you are looking at the spark for a regional conflagration.
It is interesting because the Litani also serves as a demographic and economic boundary. South of the river is the heartland of the Shia community, but the river itself is vital for Lebanon's agriculture and hydroelectric power. By controlling the territory around the river, Hezbollah does not just control a military buffer. They control a significant portion of the country's remaining viable infrastructure. It is part of that state, within a state model where they provide the things the actual government in Beirut cannot. They manage the water, they manage the electricity in many areas, and they provide the security.
And that is the tragedy of the Lebanese state. We called it the polite fiction back in episode 954. The central government is so hamstrung by sectarian quotas and economic collapse that they have no choice but to let Hezbollah operate. If the Lebanese army tried to move south of the Litani to actually disarm the group, it would trigger a civil war that the army would likely lose. So, The state just pretends everything is fine while a foreign-backed non-state army uses their territory as a launch pad. It is a parasitic relationship where the host is too weak to remove the parasite, and the parasite is smart enough not to kill the host entirely.
It really highlights the evolution of modern warfare, doesn't it? We are moving away from the era where only nations had this kind of power. When you look at the Radwan unit, they are not just fighters, they are specialists. They use electronic warfare to jam communications. They use anti-ship missiles like the Yakont to threaten the Mediterranean coastline, and they have an air defense umbrella that, while not as good as the Iron Dome, is still enough to make air superiority a challenge. They have moved from being a guerrilla force to being a denial force, one that can prevent a superior military from operating freely in their backyard.
The air defense aspect is something people really underestimate. They have transitioned from simple shoulder-fired missiles to more sophisticated Russian and Iranian systems. They have the SA-8 and the SA-22. This means that a drone or a helicopter cannot just loiter over southern Lebanon with impunity anymore. They have to fight for that airspace. Every single layer of their military structure is designed to raise the cost of intervention for a conventional power. It is about deterrence through the threat of a high-intensity, bloody conflict that would look more like World War II than a counter-insurgency operation. They want the cost of an Israeli ground incursion to be so high that it is never attempted.
So, if we look at the strategic goal of Hezbollah, it has shifted too. It used to be about ending the Israeli presence in Lebanon. Then it was about supporting the Palestinian cause. But now, it feels like they are the anchor of the entire Iranian axis of resistance. They are the model that the Houthis in Yemen and the militias in Iraq are trying to follow. They are the proof of concept that you can build a world-class military force without being a recognized state.
They are the gold standard for proxies. Iran has realized that they do not need to build a massive navy or a world-class air force if they can just place a non-state army with 150,000 rockets on their enemy's doorstep. It is a form of strategic encirclement. And because Hezbollah is Lebanese, it gives Iran a degree of plausible deniability. They can pull the strings from Tehran while the people of Lebanon and Israel bear the direct consequences. It is a brilliant, if cynical, way to project power without the risks of a direct state-on-state war.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about the Radwan unit's training. You mentioned they have studied the terrain of northern Israel. This is a level of intelligence gathering that you normally only see in sovereign states. They have mapped every hiking trail, every farmhouse, every military outpost. They are not just looking for targets, they are looking for weaknesses in the social fabric.
It is obsessive, Korn. They use open source intelligence, social media monitoring of soldiers, and physical reconnaissance. They have even been known to use civilian shepherds to probe for gaps in the border fence. It is a constant, low-level war of information, and because they live there, they have all the time in the world. They can watch a specific gate for 6 months to see exactly what time the guard changes and what the response time is for a backup unit. A conventional army is often rotating troops in and out, but Hezbollah's local fighters are always there. They are the ultimate home team advantage. They know which rock to hide behind because they have been walking past that rock since they were children.
And that brings us back to the Litani as the hard limit. If there is ever a major escalation, the goal for the Israel Defense Forces would likely be to push all those assets back across the river. But as you described, the terrain between the border and the river is a nightmare of ridges, wadis, and fortified villages. It is not just about moving a line on a map, it is about clearing out thousands of prepared positions. It is a landscape designed for defense.
It would be the most difficult urban and mountain warfare challenge of the 21st century. We are talking about thousands of anti-tank missiles, like the Cornet, which can take out even the most heavily armored tanks from miles away. Hezbollah has integrated these into their defense so well that they have kill zones, pre-planned for every possible avenue of approach. They want to turn every valley into a graveyard for armor. They have learned that they do not need to win a decisive battle, they just need to make the price of winning so high that the other side gives up.
So, when we look at the current situation in March 2026, the tension is not just about rhetoric. It is about the physical reality of these two forces staring at each other across a line that was supposed to be demilitarized 20 years ago. The Litani River is a beautiful piece of geography, but in the context of this conflict, it is a symbol of the failure of international diplomacy and the rise of a new kind of military power. It is a reminder that a piece of paper in New York means very little when there are missiles in the basement of a house in Binch J. Beale.
It really is. And I think it is important for our listeners to understand that this is not a static situation. Hezbollah is constantly adapting. They learned a lot from their involvement in the Syrian civil war. They learned how to coordinate with air cover, how to use tanks in offensive maneuvers, and how to manage complex urban sieges. They took those lessons from Syria and brought them back to the Israeli border. They are more experienced today than they have ever been. They are no longer just a defensive militia, they are a battle-hardened expeditionary force.
That is a great point. Syria was their West Point. It was where they turned from a militia into an army. They were fighting alongside the Russian military and the Syrian Arab army. They saw how a modern conventional war is fought from the inside. They learned about logistics at scale, moving thousands of troops across international borders. They learned about the importance of casualty evacuation and field hospitals. They became a professionalized force in the fires of the Syrian conflict.
They learned about combined arms. They learned how to use heavy artillery to prep a battlefield before sending in the infantry. They learned about the psychological impact of drones. Before Syria, they were mostly defensive. After Syria, they became a regional power player. That is a massive shift in capability, and it is why the old playbooks for dealing with them are no longer effective. You cannot treat them like a small group of insurgents anymore. You have to treat them like a regional military power.
And yet, they still have to balance this with the internal reality of Lebanon. The country is in shambles. The currency has collapsed. The port of Beirut is still a scar on the city, and the people are exhausted. There is a segment of the Lebanese population that is terrified that Hezbollah is going to drag them into another war they cannot afford. This is their Achilles' heel, the domestic pressure.
That is the one major constraint on them. They need to maintain their domestic base. If they are seen as the cause of Lebanon's total destruction, even some of their supporters might turn. But Hezbollah is very good at the blame game. They frame every hardship as the result of Western sanctions or Israeli aggression. They have a massive media machine, including the Al-Manar TV station, that pumps out this narrative 24/7. They have created an echo chamber where they are the only ones standing between Lebanon and total annihilation. It is a powerful narrative that keeps their base loyal even as the country crumbles around them.
It is a powerful narrative, especially when the state itself is so weak. If the government cannot provide bread or electricity, and Hezbollah can, then Hezbollah is the state in the eyes of the person on the street. It is a holistic approach to power. They provide the schools, the hospitals, and the security, and in return, they get the loyalty and the recruits they need to maintain their military machine.
It really is. And that leads us to our practical takeaways for today. When you are looking at the news coming out of the north, don't just look at the casualties or the rocket counts. Look at the geography. Watch the Litani River. If you see international pressure mounting for a real enforcement of Resolution 1701, you know the stakes are getting incredibly high. The Litani is the indicator of whether we are moving toward a diplomatic solution or a full-scale war.
And the second takeaway is to stop thinking of them as a group of terrorists in the traditional sense. Use the framework of a non-state army. When you realize they have elite units like Radwan, specialized logistics, and a sophisticated command structure, their actions make a lot more sense. They are acting according to a military doctrine, not just blind ideology. They are making strategic calculations based on their capabilities and their goals.
Third, keep an eye on the IRGC. The level of operational fusion we talked about in episode 757 is the real key. Hezbollah does not act in a vacuum. They are a piece on a much larger chessboard. To understand what they might do next, you have to look at what is happening in Tehran and how Iran is positioning itself against the United States and Israel on the global stage. Hezbollah is the primary tool of Iranian foreign policy in the Levant.
And finally, recognize the Litani as a strategic barrier. If you're tracking a potential conflict, the movement of heavy equipment relative to that river is the most important indicator of intent. If Hezbollah starts moving their long-range assets south of the river in large numbers, the tripwire has been pulled. The geography dictates the strategy, and the Litani is the most important piece of geography in the region.
It is a complex, high-stakes game of chicken that has been going on for decades, but the technology and the training have reached a point where the margin for error is almost zero. One mistake by a local commander, one miscalculation in a tunnel raid, and the whole region could be set on fire. The precision of modern weapons means that a small incident can quickly escalate into a massive conflict.
It is a sobering thought to end on, but I think it is the reality we have to face here in early 2026. The polite fiction of the Lebanese state is a thin veil over a very powerful and very dangerous military machine. We are living in an era where non-state actors can challenge regional superpowers, and Hezbollah is the prime example of that new reality.
Well said, Korn. This was a deep one, and I hope it gave Daniel and our listeners a clearer picture of what is actually happening on the ground. It is easy to get lost in the politics, but the military and geographic realities are what usually end up deciding the future. We need to look at the world as it is, not as we wish it to be.
And hey, if you are finding these deep dives helpful, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really does help other people find the show and join the conversation. We have a lot more to cover in the coming weeks, so stay tuned. We are going to keep peeling back the layers on these complex issues.
Yeah, every review helps us keep this collaboration going. You can find all our past episodes, including the ones we mentioned today about the Arsma Paradox and the Shadow State, at myweirdprompts.com. We have got the full RSS feed there, so you can subscribe however you like. We want to make sure this information is accessible to everyone.
And if you are on Telegram, just search for My Weird Prompts to join our channel. We post every time a new episode drops, so you never miss a beat. We are also on Spotify, of course. We want to hear from you, so join the discussion and let us know what you think.
Thanks to Daniel for the prompt today. It was a tough one, but a necessary one. We will be back soon with another exploration of the weird, the complex, and the significant. There is always more to learn, and we are happy to have you along for the ride.
Until next time, this has been My Weird Prompts. I am Corn Poppleberry.
And I am Herman Poppleberry. Stay curious and stay informed.
And take care, everyone.
See you in the next one.
You know, Herman, I was just thinking about that river again, the Litani. It is funny how a simple body of water can become such a heavy symbol. In any other part of the world, it would just be a place for a picnic or a swim. But here, it is a line that defines the fate of millions.
That is the tragedy of this region, Corn. Everything is layered with strategic meaning. A hill is not just a hill, it is a vantage point. A river is not just a river, it is a defensive line. It is hard to see the land for what it is when you are always looking at it through a scope. We lose the beauty of the landscape in the search for tactical advantages.
That is a poetic way to put it, brother. It makes me appreciate the quiet moments we do have here in Jerusalem even more. We have to cherish the peace while we have it, because we know how fragile it is.
Agreed. Let's hope the quiet lasts. But hope is not a strategy, which is why we keep analyzing these things. We have to be prepared for whatever comes next.
Amen to that. All right, let's wrap this up. I think we covered a lot of ground today. We went from the origins in the 80s to the high-tech warfare of 2026.
We certainly did. From the IRGC to the Radwan unit, it is a lot to process. But that is why we do this, to break down these complex topics into something understandable.
To make sense of the mess. Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you found this deep dive as fascinating as we did.
Talk to you soon. We have some great episodes coming up, so don't go anywhere.
So, Herman, before we go, I have to ask, do you think the Lebanese state will ever be able to reclaim that sovereignty south of the Litani, or is the polite fiction just the permanent reality now? Is there any hope for a unified Lebanon?
That is the million-dollar question, Corn. Honestly, as of March 2026, I don't see a clear path back. For the state to reclaim that power, they would need an army that is stronger than Hezbollah, and they would need to provide a social safety net that is better than what Hezbollah offers. Right now, they have neither. Unless there is a massive internal shift in Lebanon or a total change in Iranian foreign policy, I think we are looking at this dual power structure for the foreseeable future. It is a grim reality, but it is the one we are living in.
It is a grim outlook for the people of Lebanon. Being caught between a failing state and a militant army is a position no one wants to be in. They are the ones who suffer the most in this stalemate.
It really is. They are the ones who pay the highest price for these geopolitical games. We see the military movements, but they see their homes being turned into battlefields. We have to remember the human cost of these strategies.
It's a good reminder to keep the human element in mind, even when we are talking about high-level strategy. These are real lives being impacted by these tunnel networks and missile silos. Every strategic decision has a human consequence.
That is something we should never lose sight of. Behind every map and every statistic, there are people just trying to live their lives.
Well, on that note, let's sign off for real this time. We have given our listeners a lot to think about.
Sounds good. I'm ready for a break.
Thanks again for joining us on My Weird Prompts. We will catch you in the next episode. Stay safe out there.
Goodbye for now.
Take it easy.
You too, Corn.
I will. And hey, I think I'm going to go check on that garden. The silence is nice, but I want to see if the peppers are finally coming in. It's good to focus on something simple for a change.
Good idea. I'll stay here and finish reading this report on drone swarm tactics. There is always more to learn, and the technology is moving so fast.
Of course there is. Never a dull moment with you, Herman. You and your reports.
Wouldn't have it any other way. Knowledge is power, Corn.
See you at dinner.
See you then. I'll bring the report.
And thanks again to Daniel for the prompt. It really got the gears turning today. It was a great suggestion.
It definitely did. Good job, Daniel. Keep those prompts coming.
All right, signing off.
Bye, everyone. Stay informed.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts.